Several years ago, one of the astronauts who walked on the moon was interviewed. And the interviewer asked, "What did you think about as you stood on the moon and looked back at planet Earth?" The astronaut replied, "I remembered how my spacecraft was built by the lowest bidder." Nothing to worry about there. Growing up in Texas, we have a lot of tornadoes. Every spring brings hail and tornadoes. There's sirens on top of buildings that go off and blare loudly, this screeching alert that tells us that a tornado's in the area. Also, on your television and your cell phone, there will be warnings that a tornado is in the area. Now, if a tornado is in the area, you are instructed to go to the innermost part of your home, preferably a closet, and pull something over your head in case you get hit in the head with flying debris of some kind. But what do we do? What do I do? Because we're so used to tornadoes, we don't worry about them. When all these sirens go off, we walk to the window and look up. And look around, trying to get people away from the glass is a chore in and of itself because we're just not worried about it. I mean, we become immune to these threats. Our attitude is, well, what are you going to do? I mean, where are you going to run? You going to hide someplace? And if you get hit by a tornado, you just deal with the aftermath. Now, the problem is if the sirens go on too long, we begin to cuss the television because they're interrupting our television show. That's the truth. So, now having said that, I'm positive that not one of you will even blink when we get a good heavy snowstorm. I, on the other hand, will completely freak out. Probably call 911, ask where the shelters are located, and are the grocery stores open because I need food. So, on the other end of the spectrum, and don't raise your hands, we don't need to take account, but do you know people, they're always worried about something? It's just you talk to them and everything is a problem. They've always got this going on and that going on. And it makes me feel so sorry for them. It's like that's not the way life is meant to be. To worry constantly about things you can't control must be exhausting. So today I want you to remember a phrase. Someone told me this a long time ago, and it helps me out on a regular basis. The phrase is, don't create the wreckage of the future. Now, what do I mean by that? 95% or more of what we worry about does not come true. It's all in our head. We waste time worrying about tomorrow. We spend time thinking negative thoughts and devising plans in our minds about how we will handle these situations when they arise. Those wheels start turning. We tell ourselves we're just trying to be prepared, but in reality, we are creating all this wreckage in our minds that will never materialize. Even when things are going good in our lives, for some reason, we'll still plague ourselves with worry. Worry comes from a lack of faith and trust. The Greek word for worry means to be anxious, to be troubled with care, or to be agitated. Also, the Greek word for worry means to seek one's own interest and to be absorbed with one's own affairs. The central issue of worry is really the center barrier to discipleship, and that's selfishness. In today's scripture, Jesus is striking at the heart of this issue and showing the true heart of discipleship is to do the opposite of what the world teaches us to do. When we worry, we are taking our focus off Christ and placing it on our own interests. The truth is, the reason that you worry rests in the fact that you probably have not fully given the problem or the situation over to God. If you worry, you can't trust. And if you trust, you can't worry. Worry's a one-way street that takes us all away from God. Jesus uses the specific areas of food and clothing to illustrate what caused people of his time to worry the most. Jesus illustrated this by describing the nature of birds. Even in the depths of winter, birds always seem to have plenty of food. Birds have been provided the rich resources of food and the God-given instinct to go find it. They spend a great deal of time and effort to find food, but they never store it up, do they? They live from day to day, and every day is a new adventure for them. Well, that's great, but like many of you here today, I'm not a bird. And I need money, like many of you, to buy food. We get our money from many places: work, savings, retirement accounts. So in our society, we don't worry about not being able to find food. We worry about our source of income that we need so we can buy the food. And please remember that in the time of Jesus, that food was a daily concern. Each day people worked all day just so they could afford to put food on the table for that specific day. The next example Jesus uses is one of clothing. It's another area for most of us Americans that we don't have to worry about. Most of us have many different things to wear. And I'm sure most of us here got to choose and to decide what we were going to wear today. So why worry? Worry is completely without reason. Jesus makes it extremely clear that worry and faith will not and cannot mix. Either we have our trust in God or we don't. God is either everything or God is nothing. Clearly, Jesus is saying these things that worry the world are not the things that Christians need to concern themselves with. The two things, food and clothing, mentioned by Jesus were symbols of wealth and fame in his time. Today, we don't worry about food and clothing, but we do worry about other things. One of the things I worry about on a regular basis is trying to find a website that has just news on the internet. It seems when I begin to search for something, some type of newspaper, I'm bombarded with this thing called a Kardashian. I don't know if you've experienced a Kardashian. They seem to be very beautiful people, and they're dressed nicely, and there's always a story about them. I'm not worried about the Kardashians. I'm sure they are. But all I want to do is just find a website that just doesn't have advertisements. It just has the news. Eventually I do find one. And we don't worry about food or clothes, but we do worry that we're not wearing the same clothes as the celebrities. We worry that our cars don't look as nice as our coworkers' new car, their new truck that they just bought. And soon we will begin to worry that the neighbors have better Christmas lights up than we do. By the way, we had an open house at the parsonage. We'll also be having a open house to come over and decorate the front yard with Christmas lights in a few weeks. So just watch your bulletins for that announcement. It seems that we also worry the older that we get. I see it in the lives around me, and I see it in my own life. You worry as your kids grow older and your grandkids get older. You worry that they won't get into college, and then when they finally get into college, you worry that they won't graduate. And when they graduate, you worry that they won't get a job because they're going to move back in with you. I boomeranged twice. That's okay. It happens. Jesus gives a clear solution for worry. He says to seek first God's kingdom and God's righteousness. Remember, one of the definitions of worry is to seek one's own interests. Jesus is telling the disciples to do exactly the opposite of what the world does. Our first priority in life needs to be God. When we live our lives pursuing God, God gives us everything that we need. And notice I said everything we need and not everything that we want. Now let me be clear. Making preparations for tomorrow is always a good idea. Making these preparations the focus of life is unwise. To obsess and to worry about tomorrow is foolish. Remember, God is God today, and God will be God tomorrow. So there is no need to create the wreckage of the future. Instead of worrying about tomorrow, plan for tomorrow, and then focus on the challenges of today, rather than worrying about the uncertainty of tomorrow. And we may not be able to know what tomorrow holds for us, but we do know that God may not make the problems go away, but fear of them will vanish if we'll allow God to intervene in our lives. Worry is nothing more than fearing that which we do not see. We can make the choice to either live by fear or to live by faith. To borrow a phrase from our friends at Alcoholics Anonymous, they tell us to live one day at a time. Don't borrow tomorrow's worries today. Worrying is experiencing a crisis before it happens. We spend great portions of our time fretting over future things that most of us can do absolutely nothing about, like an earthquake, an accident, a tornado, and the upcoming snowstorm in my life. I came across an interesting story while preparing for today's sermon. It was a long-term study of 4,000 men, and they found that of the 4,000 men in the study, 38 of them died of a sudden heart attack on Monday, while only 15 died on Friday. There's a little hint there for you, gentlemen. Don't go to work tomorrow. Friday seems to be a good day to show up at work. And these are for men with no history of heart disease. Monday can be a dangerous day. But I think there's a very real lesson here. Why is Monday so bad? Because we worry about all the stuff that probably won't happen during the upcoming week. Once again, we create the wreckage of the future in such a way that it can actually cause a heart attack for some of us. Now, another solution for worrying is to keep a long-term perspective. 10 years from now, 50 years from now, and definitely 100 years from now, a lot of things we worry about today won't make any difference at all. It will not make any difference that you might be 10 pounds overweight, or that your child didn't make the all-star team, or that your spouse dented the family vehicle. What will count is how you lived and how you loved the past 50 years. When you look back on your life, the things that stressed you out will end up being of no consequence. So slow down. Don't borrow tomorrow's worries, and try to keep a long-term perspective. Learn to trust God. Birds trust God to supply their needs. However, God does not come along and drop the worms in the bird's mouth. Trusting God does not mean that we are lazy or indifferent, but it does mean we know that God will provide what we really need. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." And worry says, "I don't believe that God can do it." Worry says, "I don't believe God can handle this particular problem, so I think I'll spend time worrying about things that I can't control." If I can't control the outcome, it makes us worry. In other words, we don't trust that God is big enough to handle our problems. By not trusting God, we are saying, if God would just get out of the way and let me run the show, life would be so much better, wouldn't it? And finally, since we are discussing worry, I'd like to take a few moments to talk about the events in Paris in the last few weeks. The terrorists call themselves ISIS, and they want you to be afraid. They want you to worry. They want to disrupt your life. They want to disrupt your daily activities with worry and fear. Don't give in to their desire. I'm not worried, and I'll tell you why I'm not worried. We have the best military on the planet. We have an FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security, Border Security, and local law enforcement. All of these folks work tirelessly to keep you and I safe. Also, I hear a lot of opinions on the news about how to react to the current terrorist attacks. See, I believe a leader should demonstrate reason with a well-thought-out plan. A leader's words should have a calming effect on people. A leader's words should not attempt to incite fear and panic while masquerading this fear and panic as a distortion of reason. The growing controversy over the refugee crisis in Syria will be a moral test of our battle with ISIS. Comments by elected officials calling the nation to shut our doors to refugees, or only admitting Christians, as some have called for, or even closing mosques, as one person suggested, I think is utterly shameful, and it's not what our great country stands for. And I'd like to leave you with this. I saw an interview with a man whose wife was killed Friday night in the Paris attacks. And these are the words this young man spoke to ISIS, the men that murdered his wife. He says, "On Friday night, you stole away the life of an exceptional being, the love of my life, the mother of my son, but you will not have my hatred. I do not know who you are. I do not want to know. You are dead souls. If the God for whom you kill so blindly made us in his image, each bullet in my wife's body would have been a wound in his heart. Therefore, I will not give you the gift of hating you. You have obviously sought it, but responding to it with anger would be to give in to the same ignorance that has made you what you are. You want me to be afraid? To cast a mistrustful eye on my fellow citizens? To sacrifice my freedom for security? You lost. Same player, same game." He continues, he said, "I saw her this morning, finally after nights and days of waiting. She was just as beautiful as she was when she left Friday evening, as beautiful as when I fell madly in love with her 12 years ago. Of course, I am devastated with fear. I will give you that tiny victory, but this will be a short-term victory. I know that she will join us every day, and that we will find each other again in the paradise of free souls, which you will never have access to. We are only two, my son and I, but we are more powerful than the world's armies. In any case, I have no more time to waste on you. I need to get back to Melville, who is waking up from his afternoon nap. He's just 17 months old. He'll eat his snack like every day, and then we're going to play like we do every day. And every day of his life, this little boy will insult you with his happiness and freedom, because you do not have his hatred either." Amen.